It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson is here. Great show planned for you. We're going to talk about how hackers used your voicemail box to get into WhatsApp accounts. We'll talk about the problem with Windows 1809. Microsoft thinks it knows what went wrong. And yes, the big debate over the Bloomberg Business Week story about Supermicro. Apple denies it. Bloomberg stands by it. Who's right? Steve weighs in. It's next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 684, recorded Tuesday, October 9th, 2018, The Supply Chain. Security Now is brought to you by Rocket Mortgage from Quicken Loans, introducing Rate Shield Approval. If you're in the market to buy a home, Rate Shield Approval locks up your rate for up to 90 days while you shop. It's a real game changer. Learn more and get started at rocketmortgage.com/securitynow. And by IT Pro TV. Build or expand your IT career with flexible training and binge-worthy content from IT Pro TV. Visit itpro.tv/securitynow and use the code SN30 for 30% off the lifetime of your active subscription. And by WordPress. Reach more customers when you build your business website on WordPress.com. Plans start at just $4 a month. Get 15% off any new plan at WordPress.com/securitynow. It's time for Security Now, the show where we cover the latest security news and ways to protect yourself. It actually is all about understanding technology, too. And that's all thanks to this guy who understands it better than anybody, Steve Gibson from GRC. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Leo. Great to be with you again, as always. So you asked if this was the Squirrel episode. And my intent, I think what we'll do is probably have me up there live for that.
Good.
Because what I really want to do is I think get a couple of your gang together and do it sort of as an adversarial mode where I explain what it is and then you say, but what about this?
What about
this?
Yeah,
yeah.
Because that's what people say when you talk about it.
I'm thinking exactly. You and Mike, Elgin, and Jason probably would be a great board to say, okay, and what about when this happens? And what about this? Because I think there's an answer for every possible but what about question. So anyway, I'm in the process of bringing up a third portal, essentially. I had to develop an API, a generic API, which I call the Squirrel Service Provider API, because I want to bring it up for the Squirrel forums, which are written in or developed. Well, they are Zenforo forums, and while you can sort of add things to it, one of our listeners is a Zenforo developer. And so I thought, boy, rather than having to learn PHP and then figure out all about what Zenforo was doing, if I could give him a clean API to a Squirrel service provider backend, then he could just write to that. And, of course, so could everybody else. So it's like it was a piece that I didn't appreciate having would really improve the adoption ease and rate. So that's done. I've written that and I defined it and wrote it, and as far as I know, it's finished. But now I need to test it. So I'm creating a third site because I already have the GRC demo site for Squirrel. We'll have the Zenforo forum, but so there'll be a third one which explores is designed for me to test that back-end API, but it'll also be a neat way for people to play with Squirrel. And the other thing it offers, and the thing that the API has, is something we call the managed shared access. Because one of the things that Squirrel fights against is people giving their username and password away. How many people are like, oh, you need to log in? Here's my username and password. So, sharing username and passwords is a common practice because you can. But Squirrel doesn't really support that. I mean, you have an identity and you don't want to give somebody else your Squirrel identity because that represents you for the world. So we've solved that problem, and this allows people to understand how that works and to play with it. So anyway, people say, my God, Gibson, how long is this taking? Well, yes, it's taking a while because really, really, really solving this problem is something that nobody else has done. Everybody else has sort of played at solutions or done parts of the part, solve part of the problem. But really solving it all the way is a little more challenging. But, I'm getting there. So this is not the Squirrel episode.
That's a long way of saying no.
This is the supply chain episode. Our episode 684 for October 9th, where we're going to talk about the calling it earth-shaking is probably not overstating it. It's also controversial because the Bloomberg story, which is what begat all of this, lacks evidence. And whenever that's the case, you can have the affected companies like Apple and Amazon screaming that screaming their denials out loud. And we're left with I hesitate to say in this day and age, the infamous he said, she said. But, it's they said this and the other people said that, and they're diametrically opposed. But the point is, independent of whether it's true, and in fact, just minutes ago, I became aware of an additional Bloomberg story from this morning, thanks to our listener, Simon Zarafa, who when I went to tweet the link to the show notes, which you have probably grabbed from my tweet, Simon had just tweeted the link to this updated story, which has additional corroboration of the problem, different fact set than what Bloomberg reported. Because the idea that a major motherboard supplier, that is Supermicro, was having at least some of its subcontracted motherboards infected with a hardware implant, that's big news. And we got the word implant from the Snowden documents originally because there was, this is something that our own NSA is alleged to have done. As one of the things that they do is intercept shipments and make a subtle alteration of the hardware that cannot be found. So independent of whether this particular instance is true, talking about the supply chain in general is certainly worthwhile. So that's how we're going to end the podcast. We're also going to look at a different sort of October surprise, which dropped for a number of people who went to update Windows 10 with the October feature update and were unhappy with the consequences. Thus the October surprise. We and our picture of the week, as you just noted. We have a security researcher who has massively weaponized an existing pair of MicroTik router vulnerabilities and released it as a proof of concept on GitHub. A very clever voicemail hack which bypasses WhatsApp's authentication. It's texting authentication, which we'll talk about. And actually, we talked about something like this before, so it'll be interesting to see that it's actually happened. We have the question of what happened with that recent Google Plus breach, which has a lot of people screaming and claiming that Google was keeping this a secret. We'll look at that. Also, they've tightened up their Chrome extension security policies, which is good, and a welcome change to the Wi-Fi Alliance's ever-confusing radio protocol designations, those like 802.11a what, ASDF or who knows what. Anyway, that's being all changed. We've got Intel unwrapping its 9th generation core processors, which we look at, of course, from the standpoint of what have they fixed of this year's treasure trove of Security Now content with the Spectre and Meltdown problems. We've got some head-spinning PDF updates from Adobe and Foxit, where we have to remind them, guys, this is not a competition to see who can have the most problems to fix all at once. And then we'll talk about the inherent danger of supply chain attacks. And, I mean, I would argue insurmountable problem they represent if we're going to if the lowest bidder is going to be the people who build our products and they're not our friends.
Yeah.
So I think something great to talk about. Lots of great stuff to talk about.
Thank you, Steve. As always, it's going to be a jam-packed episode. The good news is it's about to begin as soon as I tell you, as soon as Steve caffeinates, and I tell you about our sponsor, Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, the #1 lender in the country. Customer Satisfaction Award winner, according to J.D. Power, 8 years in a row. #1, 8 years in a row for mortgage origination, 5 years in a row for mortgage servicing. So these people love Quicken Loans. I know I do, and I know the next time I buy a house, it's been 5 years since we bought our house. We went to the bank, and oh man, it was kind of a nightmare. First of all, you have to go to the bank, right? You put on a suit and show them how prosperous you are, because the bank only lends money to people who don't need it, right? That's the rule about borrowing money. If you need it, well, they're never going to give it to you. So you got to look like, no, I don't need your loan, but I'd like one. Then you have to fill out an application, big old stack of paperwork. And that means usually you have to go home and do some homework. Things like calling your former employer for pay stubs, that's embarrassing. Going into the attic to get old bank statements, that kind of thing. We applied in August. It took us a few months. We found a house. It takes a while, to find the right house. We looked at a lot of them, found the right house, made an offer, applied for the loan. We figured, well, we're going on vacation in September, but it'll be over by then. We'll have a loan by then. Nope. Didn't have the loan by then. We were going on a cruise. I'll never forget it, the Greek islands. And the bank's calling while we're sailing on a boat saying, we need now, we need this, we need that. We're trying to figure out how to fax some stuff. We had to call Debbie, Lisa's sister, and have her fax stuff. The seller of the house is saying, guys, what's going on? You said you wanted this house, but if you don't come through quick, I'm going to send it to somebody else. It was really not pleasant. And we finally got the house. I know, because we just celebrated the anniversary, October 7th. So applied in August, got the loan in October. That is not how it should be. That's not how Quicken Loans will do it. In fact, they created something called Rocket Mortgage to give you an idea how fast this is. It's an entirely online mortgage approval process. So scratch that thing about going to the banker. You don't have to go anywhere. You can do it on your phone. You can do it at an open house. It's fast, not 5 months, not 2 months, not 3 weeks, not a month. It's a day. So actually, it's a 3-step process. Let me walk through it. They call it the power buying process. So you fire up your phone. You go to rocketmortgage.com/securitynow. You don't have to do research because it's questions like your birth date, your address, stuff like that. They will say, okay, these are the loans you qualify for. Pick your down payment, your rate, your term. Okay. You pick the loan you want, and you got pre-qualified approval. Boom. Within, in most cases, about 10 minutes or less. Now, next step, they verify your income, assets, and credit, and they do it fast. They do it in less than 24 hours, less than a day, and then they give you what they call verified approval. You get a letter that says they're good for it. You put you right at the front of the line if you're buying a house. I wish we'd had this. We wouldn't have had that painful phone call. Are you really buying this house? No, I'd say, no, I haven't. See, we're approved. The next step is really great. Rate shield approval. Now, I can't remember if interest rates were going up when we bought that house, but they are now. They've been pretty flat for a few years, but they are now. And that actually adds a subtle kind of pressure because as you're looking for a house, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, we better find a house because if interest rates go up 1/4 of a point, that's tens of thousands of dollars more this house is going to cost over the term of the loan. That's a lot of tens of so that's pressure you don't need when you're trying to buy a house. You want it to be a smooth, easy process. It's already kind of crazy making because it's the biggest check you'll ever write. You're buying somewhere you and your family are going to live for a long time. I mean, it's a big deal. Why add the pressure of I got to find it now? With what they call rate shield approval, and this is once you're verified, you qualify for this. It's all new. It's exclusive to Quicken Loans. Rate shield approval locks your interest rate for up to 90 days while you shop. So rates can go up, but they won't. Yours won't. It's locked down. If rates go down, your rate will go down, but it won't go up. So you win either way. That is exactly what you'd expect from the #1 customer service company in the business. I mean, of course, they're customer focused. They care about you and your experience. They call it Rate Shield Approval, and you can get it from rocketmortgage.com/security now. Rate Shield approval is only valid on certain 30-year purchase transactions. Additional conditions or exclusions may apply. It's based on Quicken Loans data in comparison to public data records. Equal housing lender licensed in all 50 states. NMLSconsumeraccess.org, number 3030. All you have to remember is rocketmortgage.com/security now. We thank Rocket Mortgage and Quicken Loans for their support of the Security Now program. And on we go with the show, Steve.
So, unfortunately, people last week who manually checked for updates were treated... Seekers.
That's what they're called, yes.
Well, seek and destroy.
I saw it and found it. I installed it on 3 machines with no problem, but obviously not everybody did.
Not everybody has a problem. Unfortunately, those who did had a big problem. So what happened was that the original plan was that the Windows 10 October feature update was scheduled to be part of today's Patch Tuesday. But so at which point it would have been automatically found and downloaded and installed. But it was also put up on Windows Update a week before, where people who manually checked for updates would find it and could install it. The thing that in retrospect, and I don't know this is a cheap shot at Microsoft, but their page describing it says, with the release of the Windows 10 October 2018 update, and that'll be version 1809. Right now we're at 1802. Microsoft says, we're empowering a new era of personal productivity.
Clear your desk.
Yeah, exactly. All those files that have been piling up, in your documents folder, really, those are just getting in your way. Those are slowing you down. We're going to get rid of those for you. So what happened was, for those who don't know, some who updated, presumably in anticipation of being empowered by this new era of personal productivity, soon discovered that all of their personal documents had been irretrievably deleted from the computer. Seriously. And that was only one of a number of problems that this thing had. Now, okay, we know that apparently it had something to do with Windows Cloud syncing when syncing was not in use, although we haven't yet had a full articulation of why some people were hit and others were not, but a chunk of people were. And we know that when files are deleted from a hard drive or, any mass medium, the entry in the directory is eliminated, and then the space that the file was occupying on the medium is just marked as available for reuse. Thus, Norton's original claim to fame of undelete, where he realized that, you could remove the E5, which was the marker for this is an available entry, and guess what the first character was, or the user could say, I remember what that file name began with, using the rest of the name, and then subject to the drive's fragmentation, which made guessing where the file was a little more tricky, you could unmark those sectors as free, that is, mark them as in use, and oftentimes reclaim your file. Well, that's exactly what happened here. When people were initially calling Microsoft saying, hey, all my documents are gone, the level 1 support people said, what? We don't know anything about that. Later, when Microsoft realized, oops, we have a problem here, and they started looking at it more closely, the advice changed to step away from your computer, stop using it immediately, and we'll get back to you. Later down on the new era of productivity page, under the symptom, first of all, they said known issues updating to Windows 10 version 1809 on that page. They added under known issues, only one symptom. We have paused the rollout of the Windows 10 October 2018 update version 1809 for all users as we investigate isolated reports of users missing some files after updating. Yeah, like the ones that System Restore will not restore. So under workaround, they said, if you have manually checked for updates and believe you have an issue with missing files after an update, please minimize your use of the affected device and contact us directly at 1-800-Microsoft or find a local number in your area. Alternatively, use a different device to contact us. If you have manually downloaded the Windows 10 October 2018 update installation media, please don't install it and wait until new media is available. We will provide an update when we resume rolling out the Windows 10 October 2018 update to customers. And as this picture of the week shows, some poor guy named Robert Zico posted on October 3rd, which would have been last Wednesday, under the title Windows 10 October 2018 update version 1809, deleted all my files. He posted, I have just updated my Windows using the October update version 1809. It deleted all my files of 23 years in amount of 220 gigabytes. This is unbelievable. I have been using Microsoft products since 1995, and nothing like that ever happened to me. And then he says, files were located at c:/users/rober, R-O-B-E-R, and of course his name is Robert Zico, /documents. He says, this location is still present with no files. All of the files deleted. I'm extremely upset, not sure what to do. Please let me know. So anyway, as we know, recovery is possible for those who were affected. So subject to, reuse of the space and also the degree of fragmentation. This is why I've still sort of thought, I don't defrag SSDs, but I do make images of my system. Like I've got a nightly imaging system, like a nightly imaging program now established, and with incremental images. And I'm not taking anything. And of course, that's what everyone says, right? In response to Robert is, well, you did make a backup, didn't you? So anyway, this happened. Microsoft stopped it. It's gone away. Is not part of today's Patch Tuesday. In addition, there were reports that Task Manager was showing incorrect CPU usage levels. Microsoft Word, at least versions 2016 and 2019, would no longer save documents, no matter what anybody did. Save as, save, but apparently that had something to do with add-ons, a conflict with Word add-ons, such that if you went into add-ons and disabled them, then Word would again save your documents. So if there is anybody who's listening to this who's like been stuck and can't reboot or shut down or close because they've got documents, unsaved documents. That apparently is a workaround. And then a number of games, Battlefield 1 and 4, Assassin's Creed, Hitman, Watchdog, and Rainbow Siege reportedly stopped working for some people after this. So Microsoft has some work to do. I'm sure they'll get it fixed. And hopefully people did have backups, and this does not represent a catastrophic loss for them. For those who can, our takeaway is it's probably worth setting that deferral on feature updates to like 60 days. Unfortunately, Windows 10 Home does not give you that option, which is really infuriating that all other versions of Windows offer it. But Microsoft said, we're going to be stingy. We're not going to let Windows Home users defer the feature updates. But for those not using Home, Pro, Enterprise, and others, you can, under the advanced settings, for Windows Update advanced settings, you can elect to defer feature updates for up to 365 days, for up to a year. I would argue, for old, really cranky people, fine, set it 365 days and you'll never get a features update. 60 is certainly fine, because if features update is going to cause a major meltdown, it'll be detected within 2 months. Microsoft will fix it, and your system, having patiently waited a couple months, will have been spared whatever pain that update may cause. So I would say at this point, definitely defer features updates for 60 days. You can always then, decide you want to bite the bullet after a week of no problems, or maybe set it to a week of deferral. I don't know. But clearly, we're in a world now where this forward-rolling, continuing eras of enhanced personal productivity being offered by Microsoft could sometimes backfire on people. So I would say not. Or if you have a plan to image your whole system and or all of the important parts, then go ahead. Be a leader. Okay, so this is really interesting. Unfortunately, MicroTik routers are back with us. An interesting and really good case study of leveraging multiple vulnerabilities, unfortunately, comes home to roost here. So we'll remember that the MicroTik routers, which did not have a patch applied back in April, ever since then have been vulnerable to an exploit which had widely become known because the patch itself was reverse engineered, as we've often talked about can happen and is increasingly happening, because people have like a window of opportunity. Looks like it's bigger for MicroTik routers than places where systems are updating themselves autonomously. But back in April, MicroTik offered a patch. It got reverse engineered, which allowed unauthenticated read-only access to any file on the router. Well, that's not good. What's also not good is the fact that the user database file that contains all of the authenticated username and passwords is stored in plain text. No hashing of the passwords, no obfuscation, nothing. It's just so an unauthenticated user, as of April, when this became publicly known, can obtain that file, which then allows them to look up the admin username and admin password in the clear. And the issue then was, what mischief could they get up to? After all, this was read-only access to any file. So it's not good, but it's also not the end of, this router's life. However, it was possible to leverage that a little bit. There was a way to use the admin login credentials with that web interface to change a file. And in this case, as we reported, the error.html file was changed in the routers so that an HTTP error, which went through the router's web proxy, would return a page containing the CoinHive browser-based crypto mining software. And remember that at the time when we first talked about this, whereas a lot of these routers, as we talked about recently, are $49 plastic boxes for homes and small offices, there are also big iron MicroTik routers for thousands of dollars, rack mounting, which serve enterprises. And in those cases, if that web proxy got infected, then every user who hit an error page behind that router in an enterprise would, while that page was on screen, be mining CoinHive. We don't know how much money they were making. I don't think it was netting them a lot. Okay, so that was the history. Near the end of August, so 6 weeks ago, I think it was the 23rd of August, MicroTik security blog posted the following notice. They said, security issues discovered by Tenable, which is a well-known, reputable firm that we've talked about before. MicroTik wrote, MicroTik was contacted by Tenable, Inc., who had discovered several issues in Router OS web server. The issues only affected authenticated users. Okay, so that's different. The previous one was an unauthenticated, nominally read-only attack. This one, authenticated users, meaning, says MicroTik, to exploit them, there must be a known username and password on the device. Well, you can already see where this is going. Whoops. Your data, access to the system, and configuration are not under risk, writes MicroTik. All the below issues, 4 of them, only allow the authenticated user, and they say even a read-only user, to cause the www service to crash. Tenable has assigned CVE numbers to these issues. There's 4 of them. They're 1156 through 1159, of course, in 2018. And their titles are: an unauthenticated user can trigger a stack, buffer, or overflow. An authenticated user, right? Stack, buffer, or overflow, which we know is not good. File upload memory exhaustion. An authenticated user can cause the www binary to consume all memory. Or recursive JSON parsing stack exhaustion, which would allow an authenticated user to cause crash of the www service. And finally, www memory corruption. If connections are initiated and not properly cleaned up, then a heap corruption occurs in www. Okay, and then they finish their MicroTik finishes their security note saying all of the above issues are fixed in the following Router OS releases: 6.42.7, 6.40.9, and 6.43. So in all of those 4 potentially serious problems, MicroTik was careful to remind us and reiterate that only an authenticated user could cause these problems. That was good. However, in their disclosure, they failed to be explicit about the fact that one of those bugs allowed an authenticated attacker to run any program of their choosing by making a web request to the router. But again, that attacker would need to be authenticated. Okay. However, in that previous bug, what it allows, thanks to allowing the passwords file to be obtained by an unauthenticated attacker, that allows them now to become authenticated. So in other words, by leveraging both of these problems, neither one by themselves being devastating, but used in conjunction, they provide the first one, which is otherwise much less severe, provides enough information for the second one, which would otherwise be much less severe, to essentially allow an attacker to cause the router to run any externally provided file that they choose as root. So, unfortunately, Tenable, and while still obeying reasonable disclosure guidelines, because after all, a patch was immediately forthcoming and was made available, they posted a proof of concept on GitHub with full source, showing how to build the source and how to remotely attack any doubly unpatched MicroTik router. In other words, MicroTik was relying upon the fact that no unauthenticated user could become authenticated since April to, in their representation of how bad this newer problem is. But we now know that the internet is full of many hundreds of thousands of MicroTik routers, which are still today vulnerable to the problem from April, meaning that they are now also vulnerable to this proof of concept, which is widely available, and exploitation of it has erupted on the internet. So at this point, what we have is the news of its exploitation, and without specifics. We know that Mirai has used it. We know that it's been used by this crypto miner injection, and we know that, as we were discussing last week, the VPN filter from that Cisco Talos group spent the summer analyzing is also another user of the previous exploit, or maybe this one. It wasn't clear whether the attackers may have been leveraging this latest one as well. But we now have a situation where publicly known, by leveraging both of these problems disclosed this year, which persistently exists in hundreds of thousands of these MicroTik routers, it is possible to simply cause the web server to fetch a remote file and run it as root, and gain additional strength. What I liked about this was such a clean and clear example of the concept that we've often discussed, where you can take where multiple vulnerabilities by themselves in isolation may not be nearly as devastating as chaining them in order to create something more strong. And I would also say, again, we know anyone can make a mistake. Mistakes happen. MicroTik is responsible in my opinion, in patching them and responding to them immediately. Props for that. But their design policies, they are responsible for. And the policy, which we've discussed as we've looked at this more closely, which is their policy of requiring a sophisticated understanding of remote access security from an unsophisticated purchaser of a $49 retail plastic box for the home or small office is absolutely wrong. You know, a lot of people, our listeners, have defended MicroTik, saying, hey, it's got all these bells and whistles. You can lock it down tight. And as we found, yes, but it doesn't come locked down tight. You don't have to turn these things that you want on. They're on unless you turn them off. And that is absolutely wrong. And as a consequence, I would argue that they have earned and deserve the reputation damage that they are currently suffering within the security community. You know, most users are not listening to this podcast, and they'll never know. Unfortunately, people who purchased those MicroTik routers and haven't updated them since April are inviting all kinds of problems in their networks. And now we know, as a consequence of what Cisco found, that these things are setting up shop. They are, what was it, 6 different ways of making sure they're not removed, and they're turning around and starting to look into the networks to see what's there behind them, which is, you know, the worst case nightmare for something getting onto your enterprise network. Okay, here's a clever attack, which is clever because, again, it's sort of multifaceted. It uses a sort of the unintended consequences of the way an overly complex system works. We talked about it in the past. A security expert warned about it in the past, like a year ago, and it's happened. So a wave of reports about hijacked WhatsApp accounts in Israel induced the Israeli government's cybersecurity agency to send a nationwide security alert last Tuesday. We got our nationwide security alert on Wednesday. Anyway, of course, that was just a test. The alert, authored by the Israeli National Cybersecurity Authority, warns of an effective method of hijacking WhatsApp accounts using the mobile providers' voicemail systems. And as I said, it's clever and tricky, but it's been known of in theory for some time. It was first noted a year ago by an Israeli web developer at Oath. And we talked about this at the time back then. The underlying realization was that WhatsApp users who have voicemail accounts for their phone numbers are at risk if they don't change their voicemail PIN default, which in most cases starts off at 0000 or 1234. And apparently, based on the provider that can be obtained from the phone number, you don't even have to guess what the default is. You can find out what the default is. So the opportunity for an account takeover occurs when an attacker tries to add a legitimate user's phone number to a new WhatsApp installation on the attacker's phone. In that event, the WhatsApp service sends a one-time code via SMS to the phone number being joined to the victim phone number being joined to the attacker's account. So this would typically alert a user that something fishy was up if they get like a confirmation of account connection from someone they don't know when they're not expecting it, right? But an attacker could avoid their target being aware of this by timing their attack at night or when, for whatever reason, they were sure the user was away from their phone. After several failed attempts to validate the one-time code sent via SMS, that is to say the attacker simply retries the join request several times, and the WhatsApp service notices this. Finally, it switches to prompting the user to perform a voice verification requiring no prompting at the user's end. So the WhatsApp service calls the user's phone number and speaks the one-time verification code verbally. If the attacker has timed all of this properly so the user doesn't answer their phone, voicemail picks up, and the one-time, and everyone can already see where this is going now, the one-time verbal authentication code goes to voicemail. The attacker, knowing, of course, the victim's phone number, knowing the voicemail pickup, because remember that also most mobile telco providers allow remote access to a customer's voicemail account. So they they use that service to pick up voicemail from the non-mobile phone, enter the default voicemail pin, assuming that the user hasn't strengthened it or changed it from 0000 or 1234, recovers the spoken one-time code, enters it inside their version of the WhatsApp app, and has linked the real user's phone number to the hacker's device, effectively hijacking the account from the legitimate owner. Once the attackers gained access to the WhatsApp account, they can then enable two-step verification to the user's account to prevent the legitimate owner from retaking control of their WhatsApp account, because they won't know what the 6-digit one-time password is, which only the attacker knows. And although, while this may seem like an awful lot of rigmarole to go through, the reporting of this upsurge has noted that it requires minimal technical skills, no specialized equipment, and according to Israeli authorities, it's been widely used in recent weeks, leading to many reports of hijacked accounts. In their alert, the Israeli authorities recommend that users use either a strong password for their mobile voicemail account. Yeah, I mean, by all means. And you can imagine someone might think, why bother changing it? It just doesn't seem like a security issue. But when you couple that with failed SMS, fallback to voicemail one-time password, suddenly now your voicemail account can contain sensitive information.
I think most of us just have a 4-digit PIN on our voicemail. That's pretty common.
Yeah, exactly. And the Israeli authorities also said, take the initiative of adding one-time password protection to your WhatsApp account, so that you've got the, using a third-party app rather than SMS in order to authenticate, and then the bad guys will have no way of getting it. So again, sort of obvious in retrospect, but wow, an interesting sort of hybrid combo of things. And Leo, let's do our second break, and then we're going to talk about this mess that Google got themselves in with Google Plus.
Yeah, because it's a dumb thing. I don't think it's the end of the world, but
no, and I'm unhappy with how the press went nuts.
Yeah, well, good. We'll talk about it. Our show today brought to you by IT Pro TV. There is a direct, it's not quite one-to-one, but it's pretty close, correspondence between Security Now listeners and IT Pro TV customers, at least in one direction. I know when we went to the grand opening in Gainesville a couple years ago, their new studios, five, count them, 5 live studios in one building. Everybody came up and said, "Say hi to Steve." It was like a Security Now fan club meeting. They were all fans, and I guess it makes sense if you're interested in the stuff we talk about on Security Now, then you're interested in IT. And if you're interested in IT, man, it would make sense to maybe get a career in IT, and what better place to do it than IT Pro TV. It is, I feel like in a way I am in IT, I guess, a form of IT, but had I really been thinking about things, I might have gotten those certs. There's 1 million IT security jobs open right now in the United States. Job growth in IT, according to this is a study from MIT, grown 19.5% since 2004. 8 times the growth rate than for other jobs over the past decade. 800% more IT jobs than any other. It's never too late to start a career in IT. There's such demand for it right now. Or move up the ladder if you already have a job, and IT Pro TV is the place to do it. They've got you covered. Every cert that you need to get that first job, CompTIA, that's the A+, and the, you know, all the Security Plus, all the plus tests. Cisco, of course, man, if you're a Cisco network engineer, you've got those certifications, but there's the sky's the limit. Microsoft, EC Council, VMware. All in all, they have 4,000 hours in their library of binge-worthy, up-to-date, on-demand training. And they're adding 100 hours every week with great hosts. They are in the field. They're engaging, though. You know, sometimes the people who are in the field aren't engaging. They pick people or both. How can I put that? Less engaging than others, but they pick people who are really excited about, passionate about the content, and really know it. It's kind of a talk show format. Content goes studio to web within 24 hours. That's how they keep it constantly fresh and always up to date. They're always working on new certs too, which is great. You can watch live or on demand in a lot of different ways. Of course, your laptop on the web site or on your desktop computer on the website, but they also have iOS and Android apps, so you can watch on your phone. You can Chromecast those to your big screen TV, but you don't need to do that because they also have a Roku app, a great Roku app, Apple TV app, Amazon Fire TV app. So really, there's unlimited ways to watch this. Have it on all the time. That way you'll absorb this stuff all the time. And the nice thing is about their subscription plans, they're all you can eat. You know, it's not for one course or 1 hour or any number of hours. It's just like all the shows you'd want to watch anytime you want to watch them. They also have a team portal. If you have a IT team that you run, and you, of course, if you're the manager of an IT team, one of your most important duties is keeping them on their toes and up to date, learning all the stuff. They've got a great pro portal that lets you control a team's training schedule, track results. You can see all the metrics, logins and viewing time, courses viewed, tracks completed, that kind of thing. Great way to keep your team up to date with really interactive training that they'll want to watch. They won't go kicking and screaming. They'll go, yeah, I like IT Pro TV. Learn IT, pass your certs, accelerate your career with IT Pro TV. I just learned this. We've been mentioning for a long time that you can try IT Pro TV for 7 days free at itpro.tv/securitynow. And if you decide you like it, you can use the offer code SN30 and get 30% off your lifetime of your active subscription. I've been saying that for a long time, and in fact, you know, that really is a big discount. If you have the basic plan, the standard subscription, that's $570, all you can eat, all the shows. You only pay $399 after the discount. That's a year, $399 a year. That's nothing compared to a technical school. That's the cost of the books, less actually. But I just learned that the code SN30 for 30% off also applies to the team portal, to team training. So that's a really good discount. That now you're interested, right? That's an easy pitch, easy sell. Look, I got us a 30% discount. itpro.tv/securitynow. The offer code again, SN for Security Now, SN30 for 30% off. IT Pro TV, flexible training, binge-worthy content, and life-changing results. Go for the gold ring. itpro.tv/security now.
So we asked the question rhetorically, did Google hide a quote, major, unquote, Google Plus security flaw that exposed users' personal information? The headlines about this were breathless.
Yeah.
Google hid major Google Plus security flaw that exposed users' personal information. Google Plus shutting down after bug leaks info of 500,000 accounts. Google to shut down Google Plus after failing to disclose user data breach. Google is shutting down Google Plus after a secret potential data leak. Google Plus to shut down after cover-up of data exposing bug. Okay, so what happened? Given what Google's own security research auditors found, which is who found this, back in March, and given all of the deliberately privacy-constrained information Google had at their disposal, which is not much because they were deleting it on purpose to protect users, I think they've acted responsibly and appropriately. The controversy here is that the Wall Street Journal caught wind of this discovery of theirs back in March, which Google fixed because and didn't say anything about at the time, because Google, despite looking for any evidence that anybody else knew of this bug, was unable to find it. Since their logs were incomplete, they couldn't be absolutely sure it had never been used, but they had no reason to believe it had been. So yesterday, the VP of Engineering posted under Project Strobe, says that the posting is protecting your data, improving our third-party APIs, and sunsetting consumer Google+. And of course, we've talked about Google+. I know you guys
I used to love it. Yeah.
Yeah, but kind of just was one of those things that never got off the ground.
No. It was there, they really put all the wood behind the arrows there. They even gave people bonuses one year based on Google's social success, because they were trying to stop Facebook, but it didn't take off.
Yeah.
And then once it was neglected, as any social network does, it became spam and porno.
Yep. And very much like MySpace, which is just like kind of like okay. Yeah. So from their announcement, I pulled a few relevant bits. So they wrote, at the beginning of this year, we started an effort called Project Strobe, a root and branch. And I'm thinking, what? Is that like soup to nuts? I guess so. But that's a root and branch.
A corporate term of art. That's what that
review of third-party developer access to Google account and Android device data, and of our philosophy around apps data access. So that's all good. This project, they wrote, looked at the operation of our privacy controls, platforms where users were not engaging with our APIs because of concerns around data privacy, areas where developers may have been granted overly broad access, and other areas in which our policies should be tightened. So a very what we want from Google focused, self-imposed audit of their stuff. So they continue, our review showed that our Google Plus APIs and the associated controls for consumers are challenging to develop and maintain. And I didn't dig in enough to know what that means. That sounds like, corporate speak for we didn't do it right, or it's hard to do it right. I don't know.
APIs are hard.
Yeah. Tell me. Anyway, underlying this, as part of our Project Strobe audit, we discovered a bug in one of the Google Plus people APIs. Okay, so now here's what we know. They wrote, users can grant access to their profile data and the public profile information of their friends to Google Plus apps via the API. The bug meant that apps also had access to profile fields that were shared with the user but not marked public. So these were meant to be kept private. So they were user-provided fields that the user was not meant, that did not intend to share publicly.
So I'll give you an example of what those are, because as soon as this came out, I went to my Google Plus profile, which I set up ages ago, and there's mostly public stuff, your links, your stuff, and there were two things in there that were private. One was my personal phone number, and one was my address. I have no idea why I put my personal phone number and address in there, because they weren't publicly viewable, but maybe there was something. I think
may have been for account recovery at the time.
Could be, or there were layers of sharing. I think there were. I can't remember. So, worst case. I mean, nobody's putting a credit card number in there. Worst case.
Yes, and actually, you can't.
Right.
Google explains this data is limited to static, optional Google Plus profile fields, and they said including name, email address, occupation, gender, and age. Then in their posting, they gave a full link. And it is worth noting that there is some additional stuff that's a little more worrisome. The full list contains a lot more. There is birthday, profile photo, relationship status, current and previous employers with dates, places previously lived, and skill sets.
Yeah,
but again,
but why would you? Right. I don't know why you put those in if they're super secret. I'm not sure. Maybe there was some incentive to do that, but.
So Google says it does not include any other data you may have posted or connected to Google Plus or any other service like Google Plus posts, messages, Google account data, phone numbers. Well, except in your case, where there
I put
is
them
a
in. Yeah, I put them in. I had one public number and one private number in there.
Right, or G Suite content. Then they say we discovered and immediately patched this bug in March of 2018. We believe it occurred after launch, and I should mention that's 2015, so it had been present for years, as a result of the API's interaction with a subsequent Google Plus code change. They said, we made Google Plus with privacy in mind, and therefore keep this API's log data for only 2 weeks, which in this case turns out to have been a double-edged sword. They say that means we cannot confirm which users may have been impacted by this bug. However, we ran a detailed analysis over the 2 weeks prior to patching the bug, meaning they had those 2 weeks of previous log data. And from that analysis, the profiles of up to 500,000 Google Plus accounts were potentially affected. And that's a key word. Our analysis showed that up to 438 applications may have used the so-called people API. And then they conclude, we found no evidence that any developer was aware of this bug or abusing the API, and we found no evidence that any profile data was misused. So, I think they have behaved responsibly. Unfortunately, look what happens when an uncritical reading of the details gets loose. And so, given that, and apparently the Wall Street Journal reported that they got a hold of internal memoranda which suggested that Google was concerned that Sundar would be yanked in front of a congressional committee a la Facebook and the abuse of Facebook's private information, and all kind of lumped into one mess. If back in March they had said, we found a bug that we have no evidence was misused, but it could have been, and it could have affected up to 500,000 Google Plus users' private data. Again, an uncritical understanding of this even now led to those headlines. So I think Google did the right thing. It would be nice to have had all of the logs of that, but then that could have been a problem. I mean, like even a potentially bigger problem. So, I don't think, as I said, it's a double-edged sword. I come down on the side of thinking that Google, given the situation, did the right thing. but I also recognize it's a little controversial.
I do wonder what their GDPR liability is, because, you have 72 hours to reveal a breach, but this isn't a breach. This is a bug that could have led to a breach, but as far as they can tell, did not. So I guess they're not liable.
And was GDPR at the beginning of the year?
No,
or did
it wasn't
it
in
happen
effect in March.
Right.
So they had no obligation. Yeah, I think.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not like a credit card or social security number breach. Certainly stuff people might have wanted to keep private and reasonably could have expected to be private.
Well, yeah, and if they marked it private,
should be private.
Yes, Google is acknowledging that an API failure allowed this data that was not meant to be released to be released.
Right. Whenever I see an article about Google in the Wall Street Journal, I always go to it a little skeptically, because the journal hates Google because they compete with the journal for advertising revenue, and has always in its editorial, which is odd, been willing to castigate Google, sometimes inappropriately. So I don't know if this is one of those, but we've observed this before with the Wall Street Journal.
Yes, and I would argue too that the technical press, all of those headlines that I cited were from the technical press.
Yeah,
I mean,
they should know better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They should, not just, go for clickbait, but
drives
say
traffic. That's right.
Here's the story. So in this case, I don't think Google.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Good. Yeah. It's sad they're closing Google Plus, but they also said in that post that you were referring to that 90% of visitors spent less than 5 seconds on the site.
5 seconds. It's like, oh crap, where did I go? Hit back.
Get out. Back out. It's a shame. Everybody who, like Mike Elgin and Trey Ratcliffe. Trey actually wrote a long piece about what Google should have done with Google Plus. Those people, Trey Ratcliffe was huge there. It really helped his career. And I think we're sad to see it go. It had such potential.
Well, and remember all the work that Gina Trapani did on whatever that other thing that they, Google does this. There's a boneyard.
She wrote a whole book about Google Wave.
Wrote a book. Yep. That got washed, and they got washed up on the beach.
Yeah.
Okay, so Google has announced some additional information for their next release of Chrome, which will be 70. We already know that because we've been talking about this a lot. All of that controversy in the display. They're not going to display files in the same way in the URL. They're going to simplify the URL by not displaying the www dot at the beginning of those in 70. M dot gets to stay for now. And we've also talked about last summer we covered this. The problem with drive-by extension installation. It had been the case that websites could install Chrome extensions, which was a nice concept. I mean, the idea that you could have a website that would have like a site-specific extension that it could offer a Chrome user on the spot in order to enhance their experience with that site. On the other hand, we know that installing anything on the spot is really fraught, and in fact, standard wisdom now is never click something that a website you're visiting says you need for any reason whatsoever, even if they're telling the truth. It's just not worth the risk that they might not be. So back on June 12th, Google announced their timeline for their gradual rollback of inline Chrome extension installation. They said on the 12th of June, they said starting today, inline installation will be unavailable to all newly published extensions, meaning that if you weren't already in, you're not getting in. Extensions published, they wrote, on June 12th, 2018 or later that attempt to call the chrome.webstore.install function will automatically redirect the user to the Chrome Web Store in a new tab to complete the installation, which seems really, really very reasonable to me. Then, starting September 12th, so like 3 or 4 weeks ago, inline installation will be disabled for existing extensions, and users will be automatically redirected to the Chrome Web Store to complete the installation. So, okay, and developers have plenty of time, June 12th to September 12th. So, what is that, 6 months? Not quite, I guess, but 5. So plenty of time to fix their website so that they're prepared for that redirect. And now, in early December 2018, the inline install API method itself will be removed from Chrome 71, not 70, so you could still do it, but inline install API going away with the version after the one that we get in a couple weeks. Okay, and now, last Monday, in their posting titled Trustworthy Chrome Extensions by Default, they said what they announced was an additional set of steps which will be appearing in this next release, so in a couple weeks. The thing that there are several things that I'm excited about. One is they are giving users control over an extension's access to hosts explicitly. So in other words, if you put it has been the case that if you put an extension in Chrome, it essentially became an equal participant with Chrome and could see into all of the sites you visit, just as Chrome can. So it really needed to be trustworthy. What's changing is users can now change this to select specific sites where the extension will be active, require you to click the extension's icon to activate it, or allow it to be globally active. So we've never had those permissions. So underneath the extension, there's this can read and change site data, and then you choose from 3 radio buttons. When you click the extension on, and then it fills in whichever site you're on, like in this case, in the screenshot, material.io, or on all sites. So you can restrict an extension to one particular place or shut it down completely and manually activate it. So that's nice. We get that in 2 weeks. And they said, our aim is to improve user transparency and control over when extensions are able to access site data. In subsequent milestones, they said, we'll continue to optimize the user experience toward this goal while improving usability. They're also going to change the extensions review process. This posting was aimed at developers, so there's some developer-aimed language. But they said going forward, extensions that request powerful permissions will be subject to additional compliance review. We're also looking very closely at extensions that use, and this makes me shudder, remotely hosted code. I mean, the idea that an extension could be allowed to just go, get ad hoc code from somewhere is horrifying. And they said with ongoing monitoring, that is, they will be monitoring this. Extension permissions should be as narrowly scoped as possible, and all code should be included directly in the extension package to minimize review time. So to me, this feels like another thing any sane developer will read the tea leaves here and realize that in the future, that's going away completely. Your extension will not be allowed to go reach out and get whatever it wants from wherever it wants. So start re-engineering that now so that you're not inconvenience later, because this really feels like it's going to go away. And then this is really good under new code reliability requirements. And again, it's like hard to believe they've allowed this. Starting today, Chrome Web Store will no longer allow extensions with obfuscated code. This includes code within the extension package, as well as any external code or resource fetched from the web. This policy applies immediately to all new extension submissions. So turn off code obfuscation for anything new you submit. They said existing extensions with obfuscated code can continue to submit updates over the next 90 days, but will be removed from the Chrome Web Store in early January if not compliant. They said today, over 70% of malicious and policy-violating extensions that we block from the Chrome Web Store contain obfuscated code. At the same time, because obfuscation is mainly used to conceal code functionality, it adds a great deal of complexity to our review process. Yeah, no kidding. I mean, they got to de-obfuscate it and then figure out what the heck it's doing. They said this is no longer acceptable given the aforementioned review process changes. And they also said, additionally, since JavaScript code is always running locally on the user's machine, obfuscation is insufficient to protect proprietary code from a truly motivated reverse engineer. Obfuscation techniques also come with hefty performance costs, such as slower execution and increased file and memory footprints. Ordinary minification, on the other hand, typically speeds up code execution as it reduces code size and is much more straightforward to review. Thus, minification will still be allowed, including the following techniques: removal of white space, new lines, code comments, and block delimiters, shortening of variable and function names, collapsing the number of JavaScript files. They said extensions in the store with obfuscated code must be updated using the recommended minification techniques for Google developers and submitted before January 1st, 2019. After that, they're being removed, to which I say, bravo. They should have never been allowed in the first place. I mean, I guess I can understand someone like believing that they're protecting some proprietary secrets by encrypting a JavaScript download. But exactly like with DVDs, where the DVD player has to have the decryption key in order to decrypt it to show it to its owner, the web browser has to decrypt the JavaScript in order to run it. So it never made any sense. So goodbye to obfuscation, especially when 70% of malware is obfuscated. And when I want Google to be able to understand and audit the extensions that I'm getting from the Chrome Web Store. I mean, so yeah. Also, on the issue of account takeover, because as we know, that was how there was that recent problem that we covered. They are going to require two-step verification for developers logging on to their web store accounts. They said in 2019, enrollment in two-step verification will be required for Chrome Web Store developer accounts. Popular extensions, they write, can attract attackers who want to steal it by hijacking developer accounts, and two-step verification adds an extra layer of security by requiring a second authentication step via phone or physical security key. Google strongly recommends enrollment as soon as possible, and it will be required in 2019. So, yay. I'm glad that Google is continuing to move forward to strengthen things. And Leo, this was just too long in coming. Okay, so we ask rhetorically, what's the latest version of Wi-Fi? Well, those of us who've been paying attention can issue the magic incantation 802.11ac.
Or AX.
Or AX. Or, well, yeah, actually, that's coming.
Yep.
Or what about N? What about G? What about A? What about B? You know, and so, or a combination of. So the Wi-Fi Alliance, the group that I would say I love to hate them, but no, I just hate them. They manage the implementation of Wi-Fi, much to all of our disservice, by not making any of their specification production process public, as I've often complained about. We now have WPA3 coming out, but only people who are members who are paying dues to be, and they're not cheap. I have seen these documents. What they publish is just the table of contents. Thank you very much. So we'll have to wait until it leaks, as it, of course, all inevitably does, because people have to implement it, like in Linux, which is open source. Okay, so big change coming. The next Wi-Fi standard, correctly, as you noted, Leo, 802.11, wait for it, AX, yes, AX, the AX version, will instead use a simpler naming scheme, simply being called Wi-Fi 6.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have backported the reason it's 6 and not 1 is that 802.11ac is Wi-Fi 5, N is 4, G is 3, A is 2, and B is 1. So gone are, so now, I mean, and this is good for the typical consumer. You know, we'll find out like the next, you know, I guess at some point we'll get an update from Google with Android and Apple with iOS that it supports, that our new devices support Wi-Fi 6 if they don't already. Maybe they do. And you'll go, when you're shopping, for your next Wi-Fi router, it'll just say, you know, supports Wi-Fi 1 through 6 probably. And it's like, oh, good. So the Wi-Fi Alliance wrote, to help users identify devices that provide the latest Wi-Fi experience, Wi-Fi Alliance has introduced simplified generational names that may appear in device names and product descriptions. Wi-Fi devices supporting the latest generation of connectivity are based on the 802.11ax standard and are known as Wi-Fi 6 devices. And then they've also produced a series of icons, which they're hoping people that like our OSs will incorporate into the UI. And I've got a picture of it here in the show notes. And I hope people understand that that's a version number and not how many people are connected, because
it's not clear at all.
It's not at all clear. Exactly. It's like, wait, there are 6 people on this Wi-Fi. Yeah, maybe I should use the one that only has 4 people. I don't know. Yeah, maybe 6 is better or stronger. Who knows? Anyway, so for what it's worth, we're entering Wi-Fi 6, which is what was it? Wi-Fi 6 is supposed to do? It's mo better. It's anyway. That's enough. I
can't remember actually.
It's higher data rates, increased capacity, better performance, even in dense environments such as stadiums or public venues, and increased power efficiency, making it a worthwhile upgrade for smart home and IoT devices. So,
just as you said, it's mo better.
Yeah, mo better. We want 6. Get 6. Yep. We also want 9th generation core processors from Intel, which they unwrapped yesterday to much fanfare. They, of course, did a whole bunch of them. I was focused on the desktop, where, boy, are these things getting
28
fast.
cores. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Every one of them with speculative execution built right in.
Built right in. Yep. Just speculate all you want. And also in the case, because there is, for example, the i9 9900, the K versions, which are the unlocked speedy guys. This 9900K can burst to 5 gigahertz speed. And let's harken back to the 4.77 megahertz. So what is that? That's
it's faster.
1,000 times.
Wow.
It's faster. More faster. Yes. You can also cook your breakfast on it. Because these
265 watts on the Xeon. That's a lot for a processor.
Yeah, maybe if you had one of the heat sink with fins, you could just use it to dry your hair. Oh my goodness!
They do make a Bitcoin miner that doubles as a room heater. I think this would be perfect for that.
Yes, they do actually.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
Just blow some cold air over it, and it'll come out hot. So the good news is they have built, as one would expect, some additional mitigations are built in. There was a slide during yesterday's presentation read, the new desktop processors include protections for the security vulnerabilities commonly referred to as Spectre, Meltdown, and L1TF, which of course we've covered extensively all year. These protections include a combination of the hardware design changes we announced earlier this year, as well as software and microcode updates. Okay, so in this case, there was time to change the hardware, whereas, of course, until now, we've had to settle with just software and microcode. So there are the 5 problems. The Spectre Variant 2 branch target injection, that's not a hardware-based fix. It is microcode and software, but of course in this case it's already got the microcode. So and all of the latest Windows and Linux and I assume Apple. I have not been really keeping my eye on them, but the OS knows about the new features which the microcode offered. So whereas the challenge for existing systems has been you would need to somehow get your microcode updated, which could sometimes be impossible. These, of course, come with the microcode current. The second was the Meltdown V3, which was the rogue data cache load. That is fixed in hardware. So the new chips have it. It's not possible to have that in the old chips. The third one was the version 3A, which was rogue system register read, fixed in microcode, and now built into those chips. The fourth one is the variant V4 speculative store bypass. That, as was the case with the first one, with Spectre V2, not subject to hardware fix. That's microcode and software, and we got the microcode, and we got the software. So everybody will be in good shape with that. And the last one was that L1TF, the L1 terminal fault, which was 100% hardware fixable and is fixed with this latest round of chips. So it's 9th generation. They are i9 down through i3. So, I guess they're all 9000 series, right? Because the i3 is a 9000T with 4 core and 4 threads. So it's not hyper-threaded, and it runs at 3.2 gig. And then it goes all the way up to i5s and i7s, and then the i9 monster. In this case, this one has 8 cores and is hyper-threaded and can nominally runs at 3.6 gig and can be bursted up to 5. Yikes. Of course, it won't run Windows 7, so too bad for Windows 7 people. Thus, Microsoft ultimately wins the battle of the Windows versions by not supporting the older OSs on the newer hardware, which, of course, they announced some time ago. Okay, so Adobe and Foxit need to understand that this is not a competition. Last Tuesday, last Tuesday of this month, Adobe released security updates for Windows Mac versions of Acrobat and Reader, including 47 critical vulnerabilities and 39 that were merely important. 47. Of the 47 critical vulnerabilities, 46 of those allowed for remote code execution, one allowed for escalation of privileges, whereas the 39 important vulnerabilities were information disclosure. And remember that in the case of a PDF document, which a reader is reading, that there's never been, well, it's probably safe to say, there's never been an interpreter as troubled and incredibly complex as a PDF interpreter. So and we know how difficult it is to get an interpreter to work right, but they haven't yet. And so 47 critical vulnerabilities, 46 of them remote code. And this means if you've got your web browser configured to use Adobe Reader as its reader, which I don't think anyone should do anymore, use the built-in PDF viewers. But if you did, and somebody sent you a deliberately crafted PDF, they could run code of their choosing on your computer. So it is a huge, huge attack surface for today's machines. However, that was not the largest number of PDF problems. Not to be outdone, Foxit needs to be updated too. So if you have left the Adobe train and switched over to Foxit, I'm using Nitro as mine. When I switched to when I rebuilt this new system after my WinXP machine died, as we'll remember a few months ago, I had an Acrobat there, and it was a fully purchased licensed one, but there was no way to recover the license, and Adobe wanted, I just didn't want to go with them. So I ended up choosing Nitro PDF.
I think it's good.
I looked at like 12.
Right.
And many of them are nice, but they do not produce small PDFs. They produce big, lazy, blobby PDFs. And so, no, Nitro.
I shivered because this morning when Google announced its new Pixel Slate, and it comes with Adobe Acrobat. And I went, really? But it is a problem on Chrome OS to do PDFs, so maybe they had to do it. Yeah. Anyway,
Foxit, their update fixes 116 vulnerabilities.
Holy cow.
I know.
Is there something inherent in PDF rendering?
It's just really, really difficult.
It's an interpreter, right?
Yeah, it's an interpreter, and it is. And it's probably, something like Foxit is probably based on old Ghost script code,
right.
Which they grabbed and then they took in-house. And Ghost script was written just with good intentions, but once upon a time to sort of be a free and open source alternative for PDFs. But programmers who didn't have a commercial interest just said, "Oh, okay, let's accept this." Because a PDF is, as we know, it is a fully parameter-driven, tokenized description of a page. It's a page description language, and it is really extra difficult to check every possible special case. I was telling Lori the other day that I'm creating this third website web portal for Squirrel, and a lot of it is just plumbing. It's like if the user clicks the login button when they've left the username and password blank because I show how you can use it alongside of Squirrel. I have to say, you have to fill in your username and password if you're going to log in. Or if they leave either one of them blank, but not the other, then I have to say, you have to. I mean, the point is, a lot of this is just brain numbing, but necessary plumbing that you have to do. And in my case, it's just UI. But in the case of a PDF reader, which in this world now where anything you expose to any content externally can be malicious. And it's really, we're in a different world than we were a decade ago, where, it's like, oh, email macros, how cute. It's like, oh, look, it's a malicious email macro. How sweet. Yeah, isn't that adorable? Now it's just like, oh my God, even our AV software, it creates an additional attack surface. So you put that in to protect yourself, but it's buggy because it's having to interpret what's coming in too. Anyway, update Foxit. If you're a Foxit user, make sure you're running an update. It's probably a lesser large target than Adobe. But for example, if a corporation were known to have standardized on Foxit and somebody wanted to target that corporation, they could send one of their employees a PDF designed to remotely execute code. We owe Cisco's Talos group for these vulnerabilities. 18 of the 116 alone were discovered by Cisco's Talos group, and all of the 18 vulnerabilities, as well as many of the others fixed by this update, are labeled critical because they could lead to code execution if you just visit a website and you're using the Foxit viewer on your browser, or let alone if you receive a PDF in the email, you make sure it's like from someone you trust. You open the PDF and wham. So be careful. And I saw a note in my mailbag from Mark Taylor in I didn't practice pronouncing this ahead of time, Leo. Wasaki. Okay. Yeah. It felt like it needed to have another syllable in there. It feels like somewhere. That. Yeah. But, yeah. A lot of vowels. Wasaki, Wisconsin. Anyway, his subject was Spinrite and encrypted drives. And I see this question a lot, so I just thought I would take a minute to respond to Mark and anybody else who's curious. He says, Steve, all the normal accolades. Can Spinrite be used on encrypted drives without making the drive unusable because of moved sectors that were fixed? Thanks, Mark. And the answer is yes. Spinrite can. This version of Spinrite is completely happy if the drive is encrypted. It looks at it, it sees that it has no idea what this drive is, so it just considers it a blob of opaque storage, and it fixes the sectors. So, I mean, Spinrite never really cares what data is there. In years past, it got itself much more involved with the file allocation table and following chains and all that. A much enhanced version of that will be making a reappearance in 7. But all of the 6 versions, where we are with 6.0 now and the forthcoming 0.1, 0.2.3, they will continue. They will be much faster and much more capable, but of only doing the same thing, which is fixing the drive that you have without moving anything around. So Spinrite never changes the content of any data. And if a sector is unreadable, then it can often, as we know, make it readable again, or show the drive that it is dangerously close to becoming uncorrectable, in which case the drive will move the sector. But But what happens is the data is moved into the new sector, and the old sector is taken out of service. So and this is happening in the background even without Spinrite. Spinrite augments that process. So definitely worth doing, and it works just fine on encrypted drives. And Leo,
yes, sir.
We'll take our final break, and then let's talk about this mess with our supply chain.
Yeah, I should mention that Microsoft has put out an update. They think they understand now what was going on with the Windows feature update, and they have pushed out. They're pushing out a new version of it, or will be soon. They're pushing it out to Windows insiders. They say, we've fully investigated all reports of data loss, identified and fixed all known issues in the update, and conducted internal validation. And they're going to push it out to the insiders before rolling it out more broadly. It appears, I'm reading from The Verge, that the bug that caused file deletion was related to Windows 10 users who had enabled a feature in Windows called known folder redirection to redirect folders like desktop documents, pictures, and screenshots from the default location. I've done that. In the past, I've had my documents folder moved to D, and you can do that. Microsoft has a facility to do that. Microsoft introduced code in its latest update to delete the empty and duplicate known folders. So when you move the folder to D, it's moving all the contents, but if there was stuff left behind, perhaps intentionally, it would delete that thinking it was an empty folder, but it appears it wasn't always empty. I can understand why they would do that, because normally when you use redirection, that's because the data folder, the documents folder, is now on D. It's not on C. Sure. There shouldn't be anything left, but I guess that's not always the case. Microsoft has developed fixes to address a variety of problems related to these folder moves, and these fixes are now being tested with Windows insiders. They say, and this is about what I would expect, that they believe that the data loss happened at a rate of 1/100th of 1%. So that's what, 1/10,000th? 1/1000th. 100 times 100. So that's 1/10,000th. 1 in 10,000. Yes. But if you have a million people install it, 1 in 10,000 is quite a few people. So that's what happens when you have a massive user base.
And Robert Zico is not happy.
Yeah, he's the 1/100th of 1%.
I did forget to mention that with the October feature update, there's another change that I just wanted to point out that might catch out our listeners, and that is that for those who use the disk cleanup utility, and I'm a big fan of it because it just goes through and gets rid of a whole bunch of crap, they've added the downloads folder. And so pay attention. It's not checked by default, but if your habit is to turn all the check marks on, as has mine been, and then say, get rid of all this junk. If you are a person who knows that you've got downloaded things that you deliberately have left in the downloads folder, make sure that you pay attention if you turn that on, because this update to disk cleanup adds a line item that you can turn on, and it will wipe out your downloads folder.
Yikes. Yeah. We thought they were going to take that out, so I'm glad to see that it's not gone. Because you're right, I use it all the time.
I still like it too, and they're replacing it with their smart something or other.
Right, of course.
Fixer-upper, cleaner, triple scoop, whoop-de-doo, but I don't know.
Our show today brought to you by, I wish it were brought to you by the triple scoop, whoop-de-doo, but we're right out of those. We do have an ad for WordPress.com, my hosting service. Yours too, I know, for your blog. It's because it's easy. Now, Steve certainly knows how to set up a web server. He's got a few and a few things. But when he wanted to do just a basic personal blog, why not go to WordPress.com? It's easy. That's what I do with LeoLaporte.com. If you're a business and you don't have a website, probably the reason is you don't want to become a webmaster. Well, you don't have to master anything. WordPress.com takes care of the hosting, the security, the software updates. You just put the content out. They take care of the rest. Great templates mean your site always reflects your personal vision, your style, what your business looks like. There's e-commerce if you want everything from a simple buy button to a full online store. There are no limits at WordPress.com. It's affordable. It's easy. They do the hard stuff. You do the stuff you care about, your content. You can upload images, video, and audio. It's not posting it on YouTube and putting a link on your site. It's on your hosted server. So your data is yours. You want to download it anytime. You want to upload it anytime. You can move around. It's simple. Your site, your home, your content. They've got built-in search engine optimization, so you rank high on Google. They have social media features like social media linking. Means your readers, your fans, your customers will link your stuff on their Facebook page, their Twitter page, spread the word about you. Great marketing tools. And anytime you need help, they've got a great, friendly, smart support team. And I know because I've used them 24/7 there when you need it. Incidentally, the WordPress app, I just have to put in a plug for that because I used it when I was traveling on my iPad and my iPhone. They have an Android version too. And it's just an easy-peasy way not only to post a content. I was posting those postcards every day or so up on my website, and I did it right from my iPad. But it's also a great way to review comments. They've got a great anti-spam engine for comments. It makes it so simple. You never get junk on your site. And check stats. They've got really good stats so you can see how you're doing. That's the WordPress app. Plans start for WordPress at just $4 a month. There's a really good reason why 31% of all the websites in the world run on WordPress. No, that's not a typo. That's the actual number. 31%, almost a third of every website in the world is running WordPress. It's the best. Go to wordpress.com/security now. Get 15% off any new plan purchase. WordPress.com/security now. 15% off when you create a new website. That makes it very affordable. WordPress.com/security now. We thank them for making security now possible. Steve?
So I will begin by sharing an update on this Bloomberg story, which was just posted a few hours ago. A major U.S. telecommunications company, and I'll explain why we don't know who in a minute, discovered manipulated hardware from Supermicro Computer, Inc. in its network and removed it in August. Fresh evidence of tampering in China of critical technology components bound for the U.S., according to a security expert working for the telecommunications company. The security expert, Yossi Applebaum, provided documents, analysis, and other evidence of the discovery following the publication of an investigative report in Bloomberg Businessweek that detailed how China's intelligence services had ordered subcontractors to plant malicious chips in Supermicro server motherboards over a 2-year period ending in 2015. Applebaum previously worked in the technology unit of the Israeli Army Intelligence Corps and is now co-chief executive officer of Sepio Systems in Gaithersburg, Maryland. His firm specializes in hardware security and was hired to scan several large data centers belonging to the telecommunications company. Bloomberg is not identifying the company due to Applebaum's non-disclosure agreement with the client. Unusual communications from a Supermicro server and a subsequent physical inspection revealed an implant built into the server's Ethernet connector, a component that's used to attach network cables to the computer, Applebaum said. The executive said he has seen similar manipulations of different vendors' computer hardware made by contractors in China, not just products from Supermicro. Quote, Supermicro is a victim, so is everyone else, he said. Applebaum said his concern is that there are countless points in the supply chain in China where manipulations can be introduced, and deducing them can in many cases be impossible. That's the problem with the Chinese supply chain, he said. So that's a perfect preamble because, as it happens, I didn't title this super micro attack, I titled our podcast The Supply Chain, because this is a bigger problem than just this one particular in the news at the moment issue. And I don't know how it has a solution, Leo. I mean, we covered what was the chip? There was another chip that had a back door in it. Oh, it was an Ethernet chip. Was it Realtek? It was somebody's. Huh. Yeah. I mean, so
we've known this is a problem for a decade. Brian Krebs said he remembered 10 years ago, when he was writing for the Washington Post, he found a Chinese printer or a hardware update to a printer that would copy everything you printed and send it to a server controlled by the Chinese military.
Yes,
this stuff's been around forever.
So there is a fabulous link. The last link I've got on the last page of the show notes to lightbluetouchpaper.org, which was written on the 5th of October. Title, so that's Friday, Making Sense of the Super Micro Motherboard Attack. I commend this to our listeners to read. It's an engineering paper, and so like the guy obtained the baseboard firmware from Supermicro and disassembled it to take a look at it to better understand what's going on. It is the case that the world has switched from parallel interfaces to serial interfaces. All of this, PCIe stuff, the X4, the X8, the X12. Well, that X number is the number of paralleled serial interfaces. So you could have X1, which is a single connection, which nonetheless runs at crazy high speed. And in fact, USB is a serialized protocol. And it turns out that because the interconnection density has become a problem, speed is not. So it's easier to send bits out faster from a single pin than it is to have 32 or 64 pins. That's just too expensive in this day and age. And they're also extremely noisy. Every time you have signals going up and down, you are radiating energy. And you're also having to supply power to pump the capacitance of that signal up and down. So the more copper you have, the more electrons you need to pour in and suck out in order to raise the voltage and lower the voltage again. So it's just a mess. So serial is the future. And as a consequence, there is it's called the SPI, the Serial Peripheral Interface, which is a well-defined single pin. Actually, there's a clock line and a data line. So it's a two-wire interface. And people who have studied this particular instance with the super micro motherboards and have seen the pictures that Bloomberg posted of what looks they describe it as a grain of rice and looking, I think they call it like a signal conditioner. Well, I'm sure that's common speak for a capacitor. And it showed 6 connections. And people have said, how can that possibly do anything? Well, it could be that the motherboard allowed for expansion by having an additional SPI flash ROM, and they can be chained in series. So if there was a spot on the motherboard that was unpopulated, all somebody would have to do is to move the official chip over into the second place and put the SPI chip in the first place. And 6 pins, you need power and ground and clock and data. Clock in, data in, clock out, data out. That's exactly 6 pins. So that could work in order to allow that chip to have its contents downloaded by the processor when it starts up. That baseband processor is an ARM9. It's an older version of an ARM9 processor running Linux. So we see a motherboard that like doesn't have the Intel 265 watt processor and its heat cooling technology on it and everything else. We sort of look at it and it just looks like a bunch of sockets. But there is a Linux OS on that motherboard from the manufacturer, which starts up and brings our system to life. And we've talked about how the baseband has Ethernet communications capability, how it's able to be on the network by itself, how it can communicate even without an OS on top and loaded. So it's fully awake and aware and has drivers for Ethernet in addition to all the other peripherals that it needs to set up at boot time. So from a standpoint of skeptics who doubt the technical veracity, it is very clear from an engineering standpoint that something like this is completely possible. I would also argue that this is huge. It is probably understood and is probably enjoying some containment within our intelligence services because we're talking about an economic global partner in China with whom we do a lot of trade, who is apparently, if we believe the facts claimed, where their intelligence services have engineered this technology to infiltrate the hardware of a U.S. major motherboard manufacturer. Supermicro isn't as well known as Gigabyte and Asus and some others, but it is a major player in the server farm business, with at least 30 customers, among whom are Apple and Amazon. And so an infiltration of this sort, it has epic scope and consequence, and really does. I have no reason to disbelieve it. Apple and Amazon's denials probably, given the fact that Supermicro's stock dropped in half, it was down 47% in one day after the news. Yeah. Yes, and then it dropped another chunk. I don't remember how much. There isn't much left for it to go. But this most recent news of this morning's report of an Ethernet connector having an embedded SPI, hardware implant, knocked its stock down even further. So, yikes.
I guess for this show and in general, our audience, the takeaway, you can debate about, whether this happened, whether Supermicro knew, whether, why are Apple and Amazon and others so vigorously denying it, and yet Bloomberg stands by their story. All of that is a lot of heat, but there's no question that these kinds of supply chain modifications happen. I was talking to somebody who buys a lot of servers, and he said it's routine. It's unusual for it to happen at the factory. Much more often it happens in transit. It's usually done as a targeted attack. So that We've got these 15 servers going to Sony. let's modify those. Hardware modifications are not unusual, like this Ethernet port modification. They're very difficult to detect and often go undetected.
Yep.
And because the supply chain, well, even if the supply chain weren't in China, we don't have a secure way of transiting this stuff. So, and by the way, the other final point is the U.S. does this just as often as every other country.
As I said, we learned the first time we used the word implant on this show
was ours.
Was Edward Snowden,
Yeah.
Because the NSA
Yes.
was, implanting and doing exactly this. They were intercepting packages bound for targeted targets and making a change.
Right. So there really isn't anything in this story besides the specific allegations about Supermicro and the fact that they were ending up in elementals, which were ending up in the Department of Defense and the Mormon Church and Twit, by the way. Those specifics you could debate, but it doesn't essentially change the point, which is this is happening and has been happening and is extraordinarily difficult to stop. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the only, so I wanted to make it very clear to our listeners that technically there is no problem with this. That little pea size, that grain of rice size thing could very likely be a serial peripheral interface flash ROM.
Right.
That's not in question here. And the idea that the motherboard, they're typically 32K, the motherboard engineers, the designers, could have just left some pads available for a different, for expansion space, so they wouldn't have to redesign the motherboard. They would just populate the 6 little pads with an additional grain of rice if they needed more than 32K of storage in the future.
Right.
And things like infected Ethernet connectors. That's not science fiction, unfortunately. We may wish it were, but it isn't. And I think, Leo, the problem with this kind of hardware, I would say, implantation at scale, is that it seems like it was a spray. What we know from Bloomberg's reporting is that it wasn't Supermicro themselves, nor their Chinese plant, but probably the subcontractors they use for overflow capacity that took the opportunity. And so somebody somewhere in China took it upon themselves. We don't know how high up the orders came. If we believe Bloomberg, and again, we have no evidence at this point, and I don't think we're going to. I mean, again, Apple cannot have it be known that their server farms were infected with malicious hardware from China. They can't.
Yeah.
Nor can Amazon.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, for the good of their stockholders and their reputation, they have to say no.
That's kind of my take on it.
I bet there are people who know otherwise.
If this really happened, there will be more. There will be motherboards out there that are modified in that way, and they will surface. There must be thousands. Alex Lindsay says he has
tens of thousands.
Yeah, Alex Lindsay has an Elemental with the old Supermicro motherboard from 2015. He's got this must be hard to detect. We're going to send it to Chipworks or something for them to figure it out. But this will, I think we've not heard the end of it, I guess.
Yeah, well, and this morning we heard something. Another credible source who says he was asked by a major telecommunications firm to inspect their data center. He found data traffic which from the baseband processor that was unauthorized, traced it back, and found a fake Ethernet connector that had on a Supermicro motherboard that had been affected.
How hard is that to do? Wouldn't that be the first avenue, is to see if there were unexpected traffic? Or is that just very hard to find?
Yes, and in fact, that's how this was found. It was a ping that was phoning home and somebody, but again, Sony, in your example, it was perfect. Where I was headed was the idea of spraying the world with this is dangerous because someone in the world is going to find it. And whereas modifying 15 servers that are headed for Sony is much less dangerous just because of the law of numbers. And Sony it isn't a mainstream data, data centering is not their business. They're just in business to do something else. And so computers are just arriving and some IT guy is slapping them into slapping the server blades into a chassis and firing it up and loading the OSs. And so they would never be any the wiser, nor would they be as likely to catch a little ping leaving in order to phone home. Whereas it was traffic pursuant to this story that tipped off somebody that, wait a minute, what? And our listeners will remember all the trouble I had when I upgraded my server. I was having all kinds of weird behavior on an Intel motherboard until I moved the connector away from the primary NIC 1 to NIC 2, and all the problems went away because something about the baseband processor, which is only on the primary NIC, was causing these problems.
It's a fascinating story for a variety of reasons. It really does resonate with the political environment. It is a they said story. It's fake news according to some. It's the God's truth according to others. It's really an interesting story. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more.
Anyway, for anyone who's interested, this blue touch paper, lightbluetouchpaper.org piece, making sense of the Supermicro motherboard attack. If you're interested, it's written by a techie, and it was sent to me by a good friend, and is definitely got a nice take on this.
Yes.
I mean, like from a, is this reasonable? And the answer is, yeah.
Yep. Oh, I think this is a story that's only just begun.
Yeah.
But this show has come to an end, so there you go. But we'll be back every Tuesday about 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 20:30 UTC. It's Security Now time, and a jolly cheer goes up throughout the geek community as Steve takes to the air and explains it all. You read a story like that, and I know my only thought was, well, I can't wait till Tuesday. I can't wait. Steve Gibson is at grc.com. That's where you'll find all of his stuff, including his bread and butter, Spinrite, the world's best hard drive recovery and maintenance utility, plus a lot of free stuff, all the information you'd ever want to know about Squirrel, perfect paper passwords, the healthy sleep formula. I mean, that goes on and on. I was just the other day looking up the vitamin D stuff that we did, those vitamin D podcasts, because I was trying to figure out what dosage to get. It's all at grc.com, and this show is as well. He has audio versions of Security Now, and he's the only source for really good transcriptions written by Elaine Ferris that make it easy for you to read along while you listen. grc.com. We have audio and video at twit.tv/SN. You can also subscribe if you'd like in your favorite podcast application. That way you'll get it every episode. You really want to have it promptly every week, and you want to keep a backlog too. The archives are just as valuable on this show. Steve, have a great week. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time on Security Now.
Thank you, my friend. Till then.
Security Now.